Strategy, A History by Lawrence Friedman, Oxford Press, 2013. Planners, page 498. In 1964, when Drucker sent a publisher his draft of a book which concentrated on executive decision-making, he entitled it Business Strategies. The publisher found that this elicited little enthusiasm among his potential corporate audience. The word strategy was associated with the military and possibly with politics, but not with business. The book was called instead Managing for Results. Almost the next day, Matthew Stewart reports, strategy became the hottest word in management circles. He explained the surge in interest to two events: the publication of Igor Ansof's corporate strategy and the arrival of the Boston Consulting Group offering a specialist expertise in strategy. Walter Keichel III described the corporate strategy revolution as starting earlier in 1960 and then argued that before this there had been no business strategy. The word was barely used and there was no systematic set of ideas that pulled together the key elements that determined corporate fates, in particular what he called the 3 C's: costs, customers, and competitors. Companies had plans, often no more than extrapolations of what had gone before, and at the top, an often intuitive sense of how they wanted to make money. This was comparable to the claim that there was no military strategy before 1800, when the word began to be used. There was novelty in the specific forms that business strategy developed for the rest of the century, but in the more traditional sense of the word, figures such as Rockefeller and Sloan never lacked for strategy. Given the predilection among captains of industry for military metaphors, it would actually be surprising if a number had not reflected on military strategy as they prepared their campaigns. Moreover, even the new forms of strategy that were developing, as Keichel acknowledged, were building on what had gone before. He used the term greater Taylorism, except that instead of seeking efficiencies in the performance of individual workers, the new strategic focus was on the totality of a firm's functions and processes. The underlying theme was the continuation of the attempt to organize business affairs on a rationalist basis. The change that did occur can be discerned by considering the key figure at Harvard through the 1950s and 60s running the course on business policy, Kenneth Andrews. He was an English graduate who had written his PhD on Mark Twain. His own writing could be stodgy, but he had a clear view about strategy. Like Chandler, he was concerned with the long-term development of the enterprise. It was the product of a leader's choices and therefore of all the issues that had to be confronted in the business environment and the wider society, including values and organizational structures. With so many variables to take into account, the single-minded pursuit of a single goal at the expense of everything else was impossible, or at least unusually unwise. The chief executive therefore had to be a generalist and accept that every situation was unique and multidimensional. There could be no sure templates, formulas, or frameworks. The nearest Andrews and his colleagues at Harvard got to a framework was the simple but still widely used SWOT analysis: strengths and weaknesses of organization in the light of the opportunities and threats in the environment. His approach fit the favored Harvard teaching method of the case study, asking students to examine individual examples of business success and failure. This reinforced the view that strategies had to be case-specific, working for particular companies in a given environment rather than derived from general theories. It also fit the established concept of rational action as internally consistent, feasible in the light of available resources, and consonant with the environment. It assumed a sequence of careful thought preceding action, so that once a strategy was formulated, then implementation, or as Chandler put it, structure, must follow. Because it involved the production of a single unique product, Henry Mintzberg had labeled this the design school and presented it as the foundation for much of what followed elsewhere. He criticized it for a command and control mentality, so that a decided and definitive strategy would be handed down. Implementation would be a quite separate process, reducing the possibilities for learning and feedback. As the environment in which businesses operated became increasingly complex, sustaining rationality in decision-making required processes to take in all the internal and external information and turn it into a guide for action. This is what Igor Ansov sought to do in Corporate Strategy, a standard text first published in 1965, earning the author the accolade of father of modern strategic thinking. Ansov had grown up in Russia, moved to the United States, studied engineering, and after a spell at the Rand Corporation, gained practical management experience with the defense manufacturer Lockheed. He worked on identifying companies to buy for purposes of diversification before moving in the early 1960s to Carnegie Mellon University. His view of management strategy, therefore, came from the innards of a large corporation with a focus on getting a mix of products appropriate to the market. In a familiar theme, he sought to transform management strategy from an intuitive art into a science by incorporating in the most systematic and comprehensive way possible every factor of possible relevance. He brought a very particular view of strategy to this effort. Ansov noted an unfortunate coincidence in definitions of strategy. He sought to distinguish between strategic decisions, where strategic means relating to the firm's match to its environment, and of strategy, where the word means rules for decision under partial ignorance. No decisions could take place with perfect knowledge, though the planning model suggested that they might, and that all decisions of consequence had implications for the relationship to the environment. Yet there was certainly a difference between the conduct of a specific campaign, which could have the whiff of battle about it, a sense of urgency and crisis, as efforts had to be geared toward a pressing problem, and deliberations about current challenges and future possibilities that could take place in slower time, providing a general orientation to an environment. The planning model could never be about coping with crisis. It was about avoiding crisis, maintaining a strong position by paying attention to the total environment and ensuring that resources were used to maximum effect. This holistic approach, with its exhaustive attention to detail and attachment to systematic process, reflected Ansov's engineering background. The presentation was marked by lists, boxes, diagrams, matrices, charts, and timelines, with the environment typically appearing as an irregular blob, organizational units in boxes, and concepts in circles or ellipses. The result was, as Keichel put it, filigreed to an overwrought fault, with the finale a one-page diagram on which were to be found 57 boxes of objectives and factors, with arrows ensuring that they were each considered in the proper order. The process was so rigorous and demanding that it required that strategy moved from the chief executive to a specialized bureaucracy. It was the demands of planning that led Galbraith to see a shift in power to the technostructure. This importance of planning, in the sense that this was an arena where the Soviet Union was stealing a march on its capitalist rivals, reinforced the cult of managerialism. Its exemplary figure in this mobilization of management to serve the nation was Robert McNamara. From early in his career, he had illustrated how skills might be transferred from the spheres of business to military affairs and back again. McNamara was teaching accounting at the Harvard Business School when the Second World War came. He was recruited with a number of his faculty colleagues into the Army Air Corps to join the Office of Statistical Control, a group led by Charles Bates Tex Thornton, combining a relentless pursuit of hard data with rigorous quantitative analysis. This group imposed order on the chaotic accounting systems in the Air Corps so that personnel numbers were known and correct, spare parts were connected to aircraft in their hangars. They also moved into operations research, showing how resources could be used more efficiently, for example, linking bombs dropped to petrol consumption and aircraft capacity. Their analyses not only saved money but also influenced deployments. After the war, Thornton offered the services of his group to the Ford Motor Company. It was a perfect fit. When his son and anointed successor, Edsel, succumbed to stomach cancer in 1943, Henry Ford returned to lead the company, but he was ailing and unstable. He soon relinquished control to his grandson, Henry Ford II, who was still only in his late 20s. With considerable drive and energy, young Henry set about modernizing the company. As one of the key problems was a complete lack of financial discipline, he seized on Thornton's offer. The team's collective impact on the company was huge, probing systems and accounting methods, asking so many questions that they became known as the Quiz Kids, a popular radio program of the time featuring very clever children. As the group's methods bore fruit, this moniker changed to the Whiz Kids. They epitomized rationalism in decision-making, deploring reliance on intuition and tradition, and were unbothered by their lack of industrial experience. For them, the company was about organizational charts and cash flows rather than industrial processes. Over time, the limitations of this approach became apparent. It was too dependent on the quality of the data, tended to ignore what could not be easily measured, such as customer loyalty, and gave insufficient credit to the long-term benefits of investment when there was no early gain. In the short term, however, the results were impressive. Ford was the first company to introduce a new car after the war. The Whiz Kids got the company on the road to recovery.